Hello. Check, check, check. Nice to see everybody. My name is Dustin Cormier, and you're watching another episode of How to Rock Astrology. This is a continuation of our series as a tropical Vedic astrologer. It's very important for us to go through the 27 nakshatras. This is part of my 27 nakshatra series. Today in particular, we're going to be discussing the nakshatra of Purva Ashadha, whose deity is Appaha, which is, of course, the main deity of water in Vedic astrology. It has the power of the feminine consciousness associated with it. This is in particular, the forceful pressure and use of feminine consolidating energy that can create an unconquerable action, which is what Ashadha means. Of course, Purva Ashadha is the beginning of the unconquerable action. The next nakshatra in our series is going to be the continuation, the extension of an unconquerable action. So Purva Ashadha brings people together to make that happen. So I'm glad to be talking about it with you today. Of course, this is a live stream as usual, so if you feel like saying hello, if you feel like throwing us any comments, I'll usually try to speak to them as best I can. I'm just going to put my phone on our video. Wonderful. So, it's a pleasure to see you, folks. Let's get started. Let's start diving into today's discussion. So, as usual, I have my own little intro that I like to go through. As a tropical Vedic astrologer, I overlay the 12 rashis, that's the tropical signs, on top of the 27 sidereal nakshatras. Hello, Shatha. Hello, Toxica. I'm having a great week. It's nice to see you guys. So this is what we do in this series, is we're kind of overlaying the tropical signs on top of the 27 sidereal or star-based nakshatras. You can see on one of my Age of Aquarius debunked videos, I've got quite a few videos on the sidereal tropical debate, and there will be more coming eventually, because that debate never ends. So this is a little story I often use to convey the 3 steps. You know, there was once a demonic ego that was getting out of hand. The story comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's even come from before that. The 3 steps mean much more than what I'm conveying here, but this is the story that I often use just to convey the 3 steps. The demon ego, Rakshasa, was getting too overblown, so Vishnu comes along and says, all right, I'll humble him. Vishnu comes in the form of an atom, a dwarf, and says, excuse me, Mr. Demon Ego, I'd like, if you don't mind, I'd like a boon from you. The demon ego says, what, you puny thing? What do you think you could get from me? And the guy says, not much, I just want 3 steps, 3 footsteps. The demon says, you, tiny little you, 3 footsteps? Go ahead. And Vishnu says, great. With my first step, I'm going to take deep space, that's the sidereal stars. With my second step, I'm going to take local space, that's the tropical zodiac. With my third step, where should I step? And then the demon says, oh, I know that you're Vishnu, so I better tell you, I better be humble and say that you can put your foot on my head. And that third step kind of represents the horizon, the houses. So these are these 3 different layers of astrology. The sidereal stars, the nakshatras, the tropical zodiac, the 12 signs, and then the houses. So my intention in this series is to convey the pure essence of the nakshatras without rashi, without sign associations. Because those of you might know from this series and from what we've been doing here is that there are cultural distortions that have historically happened in the Vedic astrological world, which is basically the idea is that there are traditionalist Vedic astrologers who practice sidereal astrology who believe that the signs are sidereal. The signs are connected to the stars. And they've sort of married the stars and the nakshatras to zodiac signs. We know as tropical astrologers that the zodiac actually revolves around the stars due to something called the precession of the equinox. So the old traditional Vedic people tend to glue the stars to the signs. And so that's why often when they talk about the nakshatras, when we read about the nakshatras, we have to try and discern the cultural distortion that happened in India, where people believe, for example, that Ashwini begins at 0 degrees Aries, and so Ashwini will always have this quality of beginning, always the quality of starting the zodiac. Whereas nowadays we find that Ashwini is at the latter degrees, about 23 degrees, I think, of Aries. Unless I'm going backwards on that, but you get the point. These days we don't consider, as tropical astrologers, that the stars, the nakshatras, are married to the signs. So we have to separate what has been the cultural licentiousness, the license that people have taken in interpreting nakshatras. We have to remove ourselves from the whole medieval period of people who thought that the signs were combined with the nakshatras, and we want to just get the pure essence of the nakshatras. So how do we learn about the nakshatras in a way that's separate from the zodiac associations that are now outdated? Well, what we do is we look at the Vedic literature that talks about the nakshatras before the zodiac was invented. The zodiac was only invented about 200 BC, 100 BC, generally speaking. There was still remnants of the zodiac much before that in Greek and Indian historical astrology and etc. But for the most part, as we understand it, the zodiac, which is written in the stars that people were using for navigation, the sidereal constellations were kind of crafted and really set in stone by Ptolemy and the Indians at the time around 0 AD, right at the turn of the new millennium. So before that, 1400 years or more, there was a text that we like to use as tropical Vedic astrologers called the Taittiriya Brahmana. This is the most authentic and undistorted literature we have available on the nakshatras. That is undistorted. It doesn't relate to the zodiac. This is a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda. It's considered in some ways to be a continuation of it. So it's a kind of a Vedic era literature, although not technically. It's a little bit later than the actual Krishna Yajurveda. So we know the distortion. I've got a video at the beginning of this series that underlines this in a bit more detail. But there's the incorrect zodiac associations that we just talked about. Also, there's the Vimshotri Lord. It's the planet that rules the first dasha when the moon falls in that nakshatra. So, for example, many of you have probably heard that Purva Ashadha is kind of ruled by Venus in a certain way. It's interesting that the fierce and severe Ugra nakshatras all have Venus for their so-called ancient ruler. Jupiter, too. You kind of wouldn't think it, but I digress. Venus is the first dasha when the moon falls in the nakshatra of Purva Ashadha. This is, some people say, therefore, that Purva Ashadha has qualities of Venus to it. This is something that Ernst, not Ernst Wilhelm, but Vic Dicara in particular, points his finger at and says, this is a cultural distortion because Vimshotri and the dashas weren't really invented again until like 0 AD. That's when horoscope astrology began to unfold. So the nature of the nakshatra existed long before, because the sidereal nakshatras existed long before the horoscope. So Vic Dicara has mentioned that there's not necessarily the quality of Venus in the nakshatra of Purva Ashadha, because Venus and horoscope astrology was invented long after the nakshatras were. So this is our second point of distortion to keep in mind. So that's our little intro. Now, it's useful for us in today's time. Hopefully you guys can see. Yes, you would be able to. So the two ways of conveying the sidereal nakshatras, they tend to be different. Ernst Wilhelm has this Dhruva equatorial longitude, Dhruva galactic center, middle of Mula, Ayanamsha. Vic Dicara just uses Lahiri, Ayanamsha, and places the tropical zodiac on top of it. So what this means is these two patriarchs of this tropical Vedic astrology that we use today kind of disagree on where the nakshatras begin. Vic's is solid. It's always 13 degrees and 20 minutes for each nakshatra. To Vic, Purva Ashadha begins at about 7 degrees 27 minutes of Capricorn. For Ernst Wilhelm, Purva Ashadha begins kind of closer to about 3 to 3.5 degrees of Capricorn. So Vic is 7.5 degrees. Ernst is 3 to 3.5 degrees of Capricorn. That's where Purva Ashadha starts. So if you've got Purva Ashadha in between those, you got to kind of feel it out. You got to digest for yourself. You know, in today's time, we don't know exactly for sure. There's no true deep authority that can say between these two guys where exactly it fits. So it's up to us as astrologers in modern times to feel out for ourselves, you know, oh, I've got Rahu at 6 degrees of of Capricorn, and it feels more like Purva Ashadha than it does like Mula. You know, so we would have to kind of feel that out in today's time. That's one of the main reasons why we're doing these videos, right? So, you know, let me know if you're watching this video, if you have a thought, if you say, you know, you've got a planet at 5 degrees of Capricorn and you've come to feel like I'm absolutely certain that this must be, you know, this must be Purva Ashadha, that Ernst Wilhelm must be right, and that Vic's thing is not as correct. Let us know. This is what we're doing in today's time, helping each other out in this way. So, now let's dig into our 4 classical nakshatra characteristics. These qualities aren't given directly in the Taittiriya Brahmana. They may have been culled by the intuitions and commentaries that might have the 2 distortion points we talked about. You know, the Vimshotari Lord and the outdated Zodiac associations. So keep in mind when we read about these qualities that they are, you know, Ernst Wilhelm in particular puts a strong emphasis of the kingdom, animal, plant, or mineral. So the kingdom that a nakshatra belongs to is considered to be particularly important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it as we get into it. For now, here we have the 5 fierce or severe Ugra nakshatras. I've kind of grouped them up for us here. So it's interesting that of these fierce, severe Ugra nakshatras, I'm going to make sure that you guys can see me here. Yeah. Squash this a little bit. We have the 3 of them are considered to be balanced, and they are considered to be plant or Mula nakshatras. They have the activity, right? Because there's these 4 qualities. There's the activity, there's these 7 qualities of the nakshatras, there's the sexual yoni animal. It's used in lunar compatibility in marriage assessment. And then there's the kingdom. It's animal, plant, or mineral. So it's interesting that there is these 3 nakshatras that all have a very similar resonance to them. They're all balanced, and they all are considered to be plant or Mula nakshatras. So it'd be interesting to dig through these 3 and see where they have similarities of quality. It is interesting, yes, that they all have Venus for their so-called Vimshotari Lord as well. But I digress. So we have Purva Ashadha. It's balanced. It's Ugra. It is the male monkey. And it is plant-based. It is a Mula Nakshatra, whereas Magha and Purva Bhadrapada are also Ugra. They are mineral nakshatras. Right? So let's take just a moment to kind of digest and discuss what exactly it would mean to say that a nakshatra is of one of these kingdoms. Now, Ernst Wilhelm gives us a key, a kind of a clue for us to understand what the nature of these classifications mean in terms of the nakshatras. And he relates them to the modalities of the signs. So we have cardinal, fixed, and mutable, right? Cardinal is the dhatu. It's the mineral quality. Cardinal looks all around, really digs into it's opportunistic. It's kind of looking at the physical world in a very emphasized way. It sees trends in a specific nature and quality of a physical thing that it is endeavoring to absorb its consciousness through. So Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, these cardinal signs have this dhatu, this mineral quality. Now, between the mineral and the third is Mula. That's plant, and that's what the present nakshatra, Purva Ashadha, is all about. The Mula, the plant nakshatras, exist between dhatu, which is mineral, and jiva, which is the third one. The third nakshatra is jiva, and this relates to animals. So they are the most, quote-unquote, intellectualized, which means they're the furthest from the minerals. So they are human people. You know, this is like PR. This is like CEOs who know how to manage a company and the people within the company. The dhatu people are dealing with the material on the ground. You know, let's say we are talking about a company that takes limestone and deals in limestone. Okay, limestone they use for making concrete. They make sculptures and things out of it. Limestone is a very basic mineral that's used everywhere. So we've got the dhatu people who are actually on the ground, getting their hands dirty with the mineral, learning the quality of the mineral, limestone, learning all the possible uses of it, and kind of learning about all the other limestone quarries in the area. Then you've got the jiva people who are CEOs, and they don't give a darn about the limestone itself. They have found themselves working in a company, and they've been hired by this company to deal with humans, to deal with the company, to deal with PR. You know, what do the people on the ground need, and how much money and resources do we have to give them what they need? How do we find a balance between those two things? That's jiva. As well, the jiva people are also taking the capital, taking their resources, and speaking to other companies about it. Talking with other limestone quarries, or, you know, the people who use the machines at the limestone quarries. There needs to be people saying, I need these machines, I need these dump trucks, I need these cranes to go to our quarry, but then they've got to go to this next quarry the next day, so we got to organize those. This is all jiva stuff. Mula is the middle of both of these. The plant nakshatra Mula exists in between the dhatu people and the jiva people. So Mula, the plant nakshatra, which is what Purva Ashadha is all about, is a networker, is a real connecting point, even more than the jiva people are. It's a connector from various different types of physical things, the on-the-ground physical people dealing with minerals. The Mula people deals with various types of minerals on the dhatu end and various types of people on the jiva end. We're going to learn as we go along that it makes perfect sense for Purva Ashadha to be this plant, this Mula nakshatra. It nurtures. It tends to be, it has a way of nurturing and communicating and connecting. It's interesting that it relates with the fixed signs, by the way, right? That's Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio. The fixed signs end up developing on a solid thing. The Jiva people relate to the mutable signs, and they sort of refine and sort of hone in the end details of a business, of a company. The fixed folks are the folks who are holding a company really together, using all of the resources available on both sides to combine everyone into one solid company, an organization. So Mula people are the people who tend to write the contracts, who could tend to be lawyers, who tend to be team players, who connect various different people, bosses, associates to come together and to really make the company in a way. Mike Bailey wonders if Mula natives tend to be so buff. When you say Mula, do you mean Mula Nakshatra, or do you mean Mula as in the plant Nakshatra quality? Because either way, that'd be interesting to think about. But if you mean the plant Nakshatra people who tend to have plant Nakshatra moons or rising signs or any emphasis there, it'd be interesting to see which ones would be more buff. You know, I would think that the Dhatu people would be more buff, the mineral people. But then Jiva people also are, you know, they need to be charismatic and political in their way too. So it's interesting to think about. But the Mula, the plant Nakshatra people, have this enterprising, communicating way. And we're going to learn about Purva Ashadha, that Purva Ashadha brings people together. They are a bringer together of different things. Yeah, so the nakshatra that's like the rock, Mike Bailey, that's the Dhatu. That's the mineral people. Mula is plant, and then Jiva is animal. You can see there's sort of an evolutionary arc happening there, even though they all actually work together to create one reality. So that's the nature a bit of plant, the Mula Nakshatras. All the Mula Nakshatras have a similar quality. Of course, there's 9 of them. There's 9 of each of the 3 types, because 9 times 3 equals the 27. So Ernst Wilhelm has given us a clue that the plant nature is very important, or the kingdom is very important to the nature of a nakshatra. So I'm glad that we can discuss that a little bit. So now let's move on. Next thing we're going to discuss is the sutra structure in the Taittiriya Brahmana. Now, in the Taittiriya Brahmana, of course, how the Taittiriya Brahmana works is that it is a round of 27 nakshatra sutras. Now, if anybody understands, you know, a sutram, like when you go to the doctors, and I'm just going to fix this really quick. When you go to the doctors and you get, you know, you have a large slice in your muscle, they'll use sutram to tie it together, and that ties the whole muscle back together. So the sutra, you just see the lines, the stitches on the top, but the surface of those lines actually betrays the deeper muscle. The muscle itself is the whole thing. The sutram you just see on the surface. It's kind of like, you know, you see only the tip of the iceberg when you look at the words inside of a sutram. Now, sutras are made in a very interesting, melodic almost sort of way. In the same way that when you listen to a melody, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I can't sing like I used to. If you know the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do melody. So when you hear it coming through, you can almost guess the notes that are inside the melody. Do, re, mi, fa, ti, do, sol, la, ti, do. You could have guessed the so and the la, because each slot in the melody contains of an ongoing vibratory resonance. In the same way, when we're dealing with sutram, each of these slots in the sutra has a continuing resonance of meaning. And so these are the meanings of these slots. Of course, we see the true nakshatra name at the top. This, by the way, this little square with the stars behind it, this comes from Vic Dicara. He's got a wonderful, he's got a wonderful Nakshatra Sutra lesson on his website. And I do highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in digging through and really getting to know the essence of the nakshatras. So here are the 6 slots that are used in understanding the Nakshatra Sutras. The yellow word is the deity, which rules the nakshatra in classical Vedic literature. If I said yellow, I meant pink. Gosh, my brain. So the pink word is the deity. The white word is the name of the nakshatra. The yellow word is the foundation from above. That's what is needed for this nakshatra to function properly. So we always see that the yellow word is necessary. It's required in order for this nakshatra. It needs the yellow word, parastat, in order to produce the blue word, which is the avastat. So the foundation above, it's like there's this energy coming from above to below. It needs to get what's above in order to produce what unfolds below. And that's the yajamana, that's the blue word. It's the foundation below. It's what the nakshatra desires to produce from what it receives. And then avastat refers to that. Parastat and avastat are always the same word. Right? So let's dig into our example here. This is our nakshatra today. This is Purva Ashadha Nakshatra Sutra. Now, of course, this comes from Vic Dicara, but the sutra itself is coming from the Taittiriya Brahmana. So I'm going to do my best to do this nakshatra justice. When Vic Dicara was teaching his nakshatra sutras, he got all his students to go through the Sanskrit of all of the nakshatras. It's been a while. You can find the better version that Vic does on his YouTube channel. You look up Purva Ashadha. He talks about the nakshatra, and then he goes through the sutra there. But I'm still going to do my best. I'm getting better at my Sanskrit pronunciation. So I guess I should say one last thing is that it's often considered very important to, if you really want to digest the nature of a nakshatra, you take your time, have a fire, cook up some logs, sit by yourself, melt into the moment, let go of the future, and practice intoning the mantra related to that nakshatra. For example, for me, I've got Rahu in Purva Ashadha, and I'm going to talk about that eventually. So sitting in some of my deepest spiritual contemplative moments and ruminating on the nakshatra of Purva Ashadha has given me great insights into the nature of my own Rahu. More than all the studying, although the studying helps as well. There's deep vibratory resonance in the Nakshatra Sutra itself, which I highly recommend everybody get into. So this is the Sutra of Purva Ashadha. Appam Purva Ashadha Varchaha Parastat Samitiravastat Appam darn, hold on. Excuse me. Om Appam Purva Ashadha Varchaha Parastat Samitiravastat Om Appam Purva Ashadha Varchaha Parastat Samitiravastat That one was it. Made that one, last one work pretty good. So that is our Nakshatra Sutra. I highly recommend that you learn all the words and ruminate on it if this is an important nakshatra for you. Now, of course, there are different ways of interpreting the words that we read in this nakshatra. Now, I'm going to say for this quick moment that I often like to read from two different sources of translating the Taittiriya Brahmana Sutras. One of them, the first one we're going to read today, is from Ernst Wilhelm. Now, I like reading Ernst's first because Ernst Wilhelm and Vic Dicara have very different ways of conveying and translating the nakshatra. Ernst is decidedly enigmatic. Like it's an enigma. Like you're not necessarily, when you read the whole thing, it's not necessarily supposed to make English sense. When you dig into the individual words themselves and translate them fully, raw, it's not Englishified. It was not written in English. It was written in a code, like Sanskrit code. And so Ernst maintains, like he doesn't allow the English to become a part of his translation per se. He translates it in English, but it's very raw, and each word is translated in its own individual, as an individual unit. He doesn't translate it as a whole in order for it to make sense. He leaves it enigmatic. This allows us to penetrate a little bit more deeply into the individual words themselves. Now, Vic Dicara, on the other hand, he ties it all together in a little bow, and he makes it so this is what this nakshatra is saying. And he conveys it in natural English terms that can be understood a little bit more clearly. So Vic Dicara does lean into his own derivation or his own definition of the nakshatra compared to Ernst. But Vic Dicara has done this for a very long time. He's, in my opinion, it's amazing. But I love to read them both. So let's begin with Ernst Wilhelm's translation of this Nakshatra Sutra. We see that Appam is plural, so it's of the waters. Purva is, of course, the earlier, just like all the other Purva Nakshatras. It's the one that comes first, and then the Uttara comes after. So this is the earlier Ashadha. And Ashadha means plural, it's victories. So it's, when translated together, we kind of read it as the earlier victories of Appa, and that's the waters. So Appam Purva Ashadha is basically saying the earlier victories or the early initiation of the waters. The initiation is how Vic would describe it. But what Ernst is saying here is the earlier victories of Appa, Purva Ashadha, or the earlier victories of Appam, the waters. Now, what it is from above it's a vigor. It's varchaha, is vigor, strength. That's from above. Varchaha parastat is vigor from above, and then assembly, conflict, and battle from below. So it's important, certainly, that Ernst gave us these extra clues as to the meaning of samiti. Of course, samiti, when put into the particular grammar of Sanskrit, becomes samitir. So the earlier victories of Appa, the waters, is vigor from above and a battle, an assembly, a conflict from below. The vigor comes from at the top in the part of the beginning, and then it consolidates into some kind of confrontation and battle. And Ernst finally uses the word battle. And it's very interesting because we're going to learn that this is partly what water is always doing. Water is always expanding, consolidating into veins or roots or rivers which ultimately expand and move and shake things up, certainly. So there can be battles, confrontations involved when Purva Ashadha brings things together with vigor. There's a political context here. You know, oftentimes we see things happening in politics and movements. You know, there's something of like the Me Too movement in here. All the movements that kind of happen. It's when a whole bunch of people come together and consolidate. They see the strength that they have in their numbers, and then it expands. Its influence expands to break open the boundaries and barriers of those who are not into the movement. And those who are not into the movement come into conflict with these large numbers of people cohesively coming together for one thing, for one movement. So that's the nature of water, expansion, and love. It's a beautiful, very wonderful, beautiful nakshatra when you really think about it. But, of course, all the nakshatras have their beauty and have their difficulty. Can you guys see me here? Hopefully you can. Yes, you can. So this is Vic sort of digging a little bit more into the translations that we're reading about here. Of course, this comes from the Nakshatra Sutras course on Vic Dicara's website. It's vicdicara.com. If you're into everything I'm giving you here, he goes into even better detail about it. I highly recommend you check it out. So, Appam is flowing waters and rivers. So, Purva means first or initiating. Ashadha means invincible or unconquerable, right? So we're going to see the full rendition when we read it through. Varchaha, what comes from the word varcha, and that's power output. So there needs to be some power output at the beginning in order to develop alliance. So it's interesting that Vic and Ernst almost are flipping the translation here, although it kind of it tends to end up in the same way. In Ernst's rendition, there's vigor from above, whatever exactly that means. We might see it as that's the consolidating factor. Samitih is, of course, the assembly, but it's the conflict and the battle, the confrontation. So for Vic Dicara, Varcha also means power output. We could see that as being vigor. And then Samitih is this alliance, this assembly. Of course, the alliance can also mean alliance that's just simply a cohesive group gathering. But usually, again, that alliance is going to expand like water does to create a bigger river, to erode its boundaries, to have more energy flowing towards the same purpose. And that's the Samitih. So Vic tells us that this nakshatra is good for using power to consolidate forces and form mighty teams. What's negative about it is that it can be exaggerative, boastful, and a bit calculating in its friendships, meaning it'll associate with people looking to see what I can get out of it in the long run. It's like, you could be useful as a piece for my team that I'm building in this regard. So there's an objectifying quality to friendships that can be extreme when Purva Ashadha is extreme. Right? So we have two definitions here, two overarching renditions of the full meaning of our Nakshatra Sutra here. This first one comes from, they're both from Vic Dicara. The first one comes from the Nakshatra Sutra's course that Vic Dicara did, which is sort of an earlier rendition of his. The following one, from the Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, that's the main one we're going to be working with. It's one Vic sort of perfected more. But I like to show them both because they show the evolution of the thought. So we hear that the first portion, Purva, has invincible flowing waters. That's Ashadha, the quality of Ashadha in Appam. The first portion has invincible flowing waters who need to express power, Varkaha, in order to assemble alliances, Samitir. So this is how Vic ends up ultimately defining what's happening with this nakshatra. He says, beginning an invincible action needs vital power for concordance, for alliance, for assembly, for coming together. And that is what we're going to be discussing now in our further part of this nakshatra video. So I hope you guys enjoyed my little rendition here. Now we're going to dig a little bit more into everything that we just read about. This is coming from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, by none other than Vic Dicara. It's a great book. It's got it all consolidated here. A lot of the work that I'm going to be reading from in here, that you're hearing in these videos, is coming from Vic Dicara, as well as, also Ernst Wilhelm and another book we're going to read at the end of this video. So this is Purva Ashadha, initiating victory, right? So let's start to dig into all of the individual words that we read in this Nakshatra Sutra. Again, it's Appam Purva Ashadha Varchaha Parastat Samitirvastat. Right? All these main words that we're going to read, aside from Parastat and Avastat, because you would know those from the natural Nakshatra Sutras anyway. They're always the same words. So our first word is Appam. Of course, we know it relates to water. The root, Appam, most often refers to flowing waters, rivers. Now here's an interesting, the real root of the word Appam is Ap. It's AP with no grammar, just Ap. And this word Ap, AP, it indicates work, action, the ability to set things in motion. So really Appam, which we read as water, flowing water, the root of the word Appam is Ap, which relates to work, action, the ability to set things in motion. So it shows us a little bit deeper psychology involved with the word Appam. Remember, that's the magic of these Nakshatra Sutras. When they were written, the folks who wrote them wanted to, there was no paper at the time, so they wanted to use words with a specific resonance so they could just memorize this 27 nakshatra rosary, go through them, and squeeze as much information into each word, into each slot as they possibly could for memorization purposes. So that's why they use the word Appam, water. It relates to action in this way. So Purva Ashadha is therefore a nakshatra about what rivers do. They move and let things move. Right? Now, of course, the word Purva means the first, the initial, the beginning. And in this case, Purva Ashadha, it indicates the initiation of an action, setting things in motion. And then, of course, our word Ashadha here, this word means unconquerable or invincible, undefeatable. Now, flowing water is unstoppable. Once water is flowing, once there's a connection between a source of water and the river, it's unstoppable. You can move it around a little bit, but you can't really stop this energy from happening. So the sutra describes how to begin Purva, a movement or action, apas, that will be victorious and successful, Ashadha, unconquerable, right? So that's part of what Ashadha means, is victorious, as Ernst said in the earlier part of our reading here. Ashadha kind of means victories in this context, in this way, right? So the early actions that lead to victorious action. Now, the next word that we read is Varcha, which, of course, when we read it, it's Varcha and also Varchas. The word Varchas comes from the root Ruk, R-U-C, right? I wonder if it's helpful for me to kind of show that. The word Varchas comes from the root Ruk, R-U-C. This indicates bright, hot, brilliant power, vigor, as Ernst described it. Now, most commonly, it refers to sunlight. And there's a cool metaphor that Vic Dicara is going to mention here relating to sunlight. It's basically the sunlight evaporates water, which goes into rain clouds that falls down the mountains, and that's what creates the rivers, right? So Varcha is sunlight, but it also is used as a word for enthusiasm and vitality. Having enthusiasm for whatever it is that's the beginning of this Purva Ashadha action. So Varchas is what Purva Ashadha needs. That's its peristat, right? So we see Varchaha Parastat. So this vigor, this power output, is what is needed. And so initiating a successful endeavor requires power, especially the power of vitality and enthusiasm. That's appas, that's water. It's this sort of Venusian feminine side of the joy that we have for this movement that we're creating here. There's goodness behind it. It's going to make the world a better place, right? That's the appam, that's the nourishment of the water that everybody feels is flowing, because that's what water does. It flows out with the bad, in with the good. It cleanses, it clears, removes pollution, at least out, brings it out to the ocean anyway, and leaves our area free of it. So the goodness, the excitement, the nurturing that the movement brings is part of the vitality, the enthusiasm that the people who create the movement, that create the initiating force, have. And of course, Varchaha is the vitality that's needed, the foundation from above. It's vigor from above, which produces samitir below. Samitir avastat. Varchaha parastat, samitir avastat. So samitir is what is created by the vigor of Purva Ashadha. It's the result. So samiti means assembling or coming together. Samiti can indicate a concordant agreement, or it can indicate armies assembling for war and for battle, as Ernst Wilhelm said. Samiti also indicates consolidation, consolidating. This is what Purva Ashadha tries to produce. The nakshatra of Purva Ashadha produces samitihi. It's this concordance, it's this consolidation. The enthusiasm and effort we put into initiating a successful endeavor has to result in consolidation of a team which agrees to cooperate, because they all know the team cooperates best when we are all looking for that water. We're all looking for the same wellspring of joy that this movement we know is going to bring. Rivers, appam, have an inherent power to bring communities together, samiti. Humans always prefer to build their towns and cities near rivers, and animals always assemble together to meet each other on riverbanks. So water is this old, ancient way of bringing people together. Friends, enemies, and everything in between. So, in summary, what we read as a totality Purva Ashadha initializes, that's Purva, it initializes successful endeavors. Ashadha, apam. Ashadha is successful or victorious, and then the endeavors, the actions itself is apam, it's water. It does so by using power and enthusiasm, varchas, to assemble a cooperative team of diverse talents, samiti. You know, and the diversity of these talents is what brings the essence of the power out. Now, this is where Vic gives us a cool little clue as to a deep part of the psyche of what's happening with this nakshatra. A more literal reading of this sutra is very fascinating. We note that rivers, apam, they need the sunlight, which is varchas. They need sunlight to evaporate the ocean water. The resulting rain from evaporated water then consolidates itself into rivers, which flow back to join once again with the ocean, which is the samiti. So the river becomes this individuated thing which reaches back to the concordant, consolidated ocean of assembly. Very cool, very deep, very psychedelic. You know, what Vic has described here, I really see a lot of Purva Ashadha because it's so important in my own chart. So, we've just described the sort of totality of this nakshatra. Now let's dig into the interpretations of the Purva Ashadha native, specifically for anyone with planets falling into Purva Ashadha. Vic Dicara notes that there's a sort of two-way quality in nature of this nakshatra. One of them is that it has the cohesion, the bringing together of things, which certain planets are going to do better with than others. There is also a strength and a vigor required, which certain planets are going to do better than others. The Krura, the harsh planets, do well with the vigor, like Saturn, Mars, and the Sun in particular. They do well with the vigor, the using the toughness and power and strength to apply that vigor, the varcha, the sunlight, which has the enthusiasm and the toughness to hold things and bring together a team. But they're not so cooperative. Sun, Mars, and Saturn have an individuating quality that's tough, that's a bit harsh, and doesn't really listen to the people around them and cooperate as well as they could. Now, the opposite is for the softer planets. It's Venus, the Moon, Mercury. Jupiter stands out to Vic Dicara as one planet that does work pretty well between these two. But Venus, Mercury, and the Moon tend to be cooperative, and they can bring people together. They can be the diplomat, but they also, once they've got a whole bunch of people in their reins, they don't have the toughness to firmly keep them centered on the goal, to organize with a tough, firm hand. So the softer planets lack self-reliance in this way. So those three suffer there, the other three suffer there. Jupiter is one planet that probably stands out in Vic Dicara's mind as clashing the least with this nakshatra's qualities, with Venus coming a close second. Did I hear that right? Yeah, a close second. Especially because Venus is a male and female planet. It rules Libra, which is masculine, and then Taurus, which is feminine. You could say the same thing about Mercury and the moon. No, not the moon, though. The moon is a little too soft. Sun's a little too harsh. And then Mars and Saturn are also a little too harsh. The nodes are considered powerful, which suits the nakshatra, but they're individualistic and non-cooperative as well. So I'm going to basically say everything I just said. I just wanted to tie it up in a bow there first. So what Vic Dicara tells us is that Purva Ashadha is welcome wherever we need the power and vigor to overcome obstacles and get projects started by assembling required resources. So thus, it's a particularly good nakshatra if you have your moon here, if you have your rising sign here, if you've got planets loaded here. It's a good nakshatra when we need to make teams, form alliances, and pool together resources. Purva Ashadha does not have many weaknesses, but one area in which it's not the most ideal is the area of self-reliance. So when Purva Ashadha malfunctions, we often find that it indicates feeling powerless and incapable of starting anything for ourselves due to a lack of assistance from others. It feels like it wants to get the power of others combined together, and once the other people involved are flowing, they are organizing the flow. So without having all of the flow, these people feel like they're out of place. They're missing something, they're lacking the true strength and power that they would like to have. Now, the softer planets are candidates for such interpretations. When Venus, Moon, Mercury, even Jupiter malfunctions, if it malfunctions in this sign, which these can, in tropical Vedic astrology at the present time, in the year 2024, Purva Ashadha mostly is in the realm of Capricorn. So even though Jupiter technically does well here, Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn. So if there's bad afflictions to Jupiter, it's a gentle planet. It could find that it has this lack of assistance from others. All the gentler planets come off this way. Now, the other side of Purva Ashadha, an ill-functioning Purva Ashadha also suggests foolhardy, hasty, ill-prepared, and overambitious enterprise. This comes from especially the egoic planets. For example, attacking opponents one is incapable of defeating, and embarking on journeys that one lacks the fuel and resources to complete. So the more decisive planets tend to malfunction in this manner, especially the Sun, Mars, Saturn. When things are not going well in Purva Ashadha, they kind of bite off more than they can chew. So the Sun and Mars in particular bring out the good side of this nakshatra because they provide vitality and power. And that vitality and power can be very good for Purva Ashadha, but their self-reliant and independent nature does clash with this nakshatra's focus on teamwork and femininity and cohesion. So it's good, but it's going to lack a bit of the cohesion. Now, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon are just the opposite. Their partnering nature fares well here, but their gentility and softness does not do much to supply the varchas, which this nakshatra requires. That's the vigor, the firmness, right? Now, Saturn's strength and determination is good for this nakshatra, but it also lacks the varchas that this nakshatra requires. Oops. It kind of does ultimately lack the enthusiasm. It's a little bit too dour to really get things popping in the powerful way that Purva Ashadha truly intends. It can build other waves over time, though. It can consolidate people, be firm, and let other people do the enthusiasm. But if this person is the initiator of it, it's a slow boil and a slow build, which isn't putting Purva Ashadha to its best effect. Now, Rahu and Ketu are powerful in this nakshatra, which they're powerful, and this suits the nakshatra well. But they also have individualistic, non-cooperative natures. And this clashes with this nakshatra's fundamental nature of cohesion. So perhaps the best planet here is Jupiter, with Venus kind of following a close second. So that is what we read as the nature of Purva Ashadha Nakshatra and interpreting the planets in Purva Ashadha Nakshatra. So the next thing we're going to do is get into Rahu and Ketu, but first I'm going to go to the bathroom. And then when we come back, we're going to continue our reading. I'll see you guys in just a moment. Bonjour. Wonderful. Okay. This is feeling like a good podcast thus far. So, everybody, now I would like to describe my experiences with the nodes falling into Purva Ashadha Nakshatra. As many as you might know from me describing it a little bit, I myself have Rahu, as well as Uranus and Neptune, falling into the sign of Purva Ashadha. So having Rahu here, it's worth explaining a little bit about the nodes. The nodes are something that really splits our life in half. So the first part of our lives, up to about age 36, is when Rahu begins to really awaken in ourselves. It's the same age that Saturn matures. After Saturn matures, Rahu wakes up, because now Rahu knows that it can start scratching a little bit into what the psyche has been lacking, because now Saturn is mature. Saturn has gathered its strength, its stability, and what it requires to function as an individual stably, ideally. If you've got a good Saturn, especially, the age of 36 will consolidate and round you out. So that's when Rahu begins to wake up. Because Rahu, as Ernst Wilhelm has described it, is kind of like, it's the jungle. It's the gold over there in them hills. It's the unknown, the dark unknown. It's something that we have never dug into because we've always been stuck on Ketu for so long. So it ought to be understood that, how Ernst describes it is like, back in the 1600s, Spain and the European colonies were starting to develop wealth, and they wanted to have more wealth, but they could lock up the fortress. They could spend a little extra money to send someone like Cortez out on a trip to go find India, or Christopher Columbus. The European colonies could send guys like this out to the New World to poke around, see if there's anything interesting over there. Finding new routes to India was the main thought. And during that time, the guys went out there, got a bunch of cool things, plants, and then brought them back to the European colonies. The colonies said, there's some great stuff here. We've got a little extra money in the tank. This could be a whole world out there that's unexplored. and we want to put our flag down there. So send out the guys. If this thing fails, it's not going to screw us. You know, it's a risk. It's a risky venture that could be worth it. We have to be secure first, but they were at that time. That's why they pushed out to go and check out what's beyond the known. So this is what happened at this time. Now, this shows that Rahu, in exploring, throwing into the unknown, requires that solidity, requires things to be solid, to be stable. And this is how Rahu unfolds at a certain age. So for those with, the nodes in the nakshatras, there's going to be an emphasis of the early part of life or the later part of life with the nodes. But the nodes are always working through us. I myself am age 32 right now. And again, the nodes open up at 36, but it's not till 43 that Rahu matures. And at that age, there's always lots of crazy things going on at that time. The midlife crisis does come from Saturn and Rahu activating. The midlife crisis in particular is Rahu maturing at 43 and then Ketu maturing at 48. And the process that leads up to those is a very sort of difficult and meticulous process that kind of builds up there. Hello, Mo. Nice to see you. So Rahu needs this stability in order for it to open itself up. Now, that's sort of, let's call that a general intro. Now let's talk a little bit about, again, the nakshatras, the nodes falling in this nakshatra. So let's begin with Ketu falling into Purva Ashadha. What you might find with Ketu is that Ketu operates very strongly and unconsciously until Rahu matures. And then when Rahu matures, this allows Ketu. Ketu is sort of something that we've done for our whole lives, that we've grown addicted to, that we've grown obsessed with, because it's a security paradigm that we have a hard time letting go of. So Ketu in Purva Ashadha is this consolidating personality, right? Of course, we've read from Vic Dicara already that the Rahu and Ketu, the nodes, they are powerful. And there's a power that comes from Ketu in Purva Ashadha. But it's a bit individualistic and non-cooperative, and that clashes with this nakshatra's fundamental nature. So just like the other foolhardy nakshatras, what we find with Ketu is that a Ketu in Purva Ashadha person probably can be foolhardy. They make hasty, ill-prepared, and over-ambitious enterprises and decisions. They think that they're going to be I'll be able to pull everybody together to do this thing. Like, I just know it. This is such an important social movement. As soon as I raise the flag and rally everybody up, they're all going to come crawling out of the woodwork to help me with my enterprise. And then they go to do it, and there's not as much fervor, not as much vigor, not as much cooperation as they thought there was going to be. So someone with Ketu and Purva Ashadha probably finds it difficult, A, to bring the varchas, the proper enthusiasm, and they also probably find it hard, lacking that enthusiasm, to bring people together, to bring people into an assembly, into a cohesive whole that has the power to create an unconquerable force or action or movement in the world. So the Ketu, Purva Ashadha Ketu person probably is strongly always trying to have these movements, trying to have people work together with them, and they're probably waxing and waning between the feeling of, this is who I am, this is who I have to be, and this is something that I was born to do, but they get disappointed because it's either too hard to bring people together, or when they do bring people together, it's hard to wrangle them. It's hard to control the people. It's hard to manipulate them towards a positive, constructive end. So what happens is they bring all these people together and everyone's looking for leadership from the Ketu and Purva Ashadha person. But it's not until they integrate Rahu in the opposite nakshatra, in the opposite sign, through the opposite lord, sign lord, that this person begins to find meaning and quality of depth and detail surrounding Ketu and Purva Ashadha. So it's the Rahu in the opposite that's really going to bring out the quality of the proper quality of Ketu and Purva Ashadha. So of course, Purva Ashadha is opposite two possible nakshatras. The early part of Purva Ashadha is going to be opposite Ardra. And then the latter part of Purva Ashadha is going to have Rahu in Punarvasu. The person with Ketu in Purva Ashadha who has Rahu in Ardra is going to find a little bit of a different way that Rahu needs to function. You know, with Rahu in Ardra, there's a little bit of a difference. Rahu in Ardra is a powerful signature. It destroys things that deserve and need to be destroyed. It's merciless towards the wicked, false, and the deceitful. So this Rahu in particular can bring out this desire to destroy evil in the world, to defy lies and injustices. And there's no mention of the nodes here in Ardra. But the Rahu in Ardra is going to add certainly a ruthlessness. Rahu in Ardra probably has to work out a lot of hatred. And it probably has to deal with lower chakra stuff in order that ultimately Rahu is what is going to narrow and make a fine point out of the Purva Ashadha Ketu person's desire to assemble people. The Ketu in this person of Purva Ashadha has a desire to bring people together for some kind of purpose, but often they don't know how to wrangle them, or they don't know what to bring these people together for. Rahu in Ardra probably feels like they have a lot of hatred. And so early when Ketu is mainly operating, but Rahu is immature, the Rahu is still present. And they have an integrated Rahu, which means they're probably pulling people together for personal angry reasons. You know, Steve bullied me when I was in grade 3, and now Steve and he's trying to be a politician, right? So this person early in their Ketu process might rally everybody together to go politically against Steve. Not for proper political reasons, but because he slighted me when he bullied me when I was young. So I'm trying to pull these people together just to get back at him. That's because Rahu is still working out the gunk, the anger of Ardra. Once this person solidifies and understands the positive quality that anger can represent and channels it through a divine love for the good things in life by helping to mitigate the bad things for the sake of everybody, not just for personal reasons, but a cleansing sacrifice and surrender for the sake of Dharma. That's when that person's Rahu in Ardra starts to come into being. Rahu in Ardra needs to accept the nature of anger and use it constructively. And that's when the Purva Ashadha person's constructive, well-meaning anger through Rahu and Ardra is going to find expression. And that the Ketu Purva Ashadha desire to assemble people is going to find good, authentic energy and vigor and expression. Now for Rahu in Punarvasu, which is kind of closer to where I believe that's where my Rahu is. It's hard to say. Vic says my Rahu is in Ardra. Ernst says my Rahu is in Punarvasu. So it's hard for me to say. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I've got Ketu in this place. But I digress. I'll get to that when we flip it. But for now, we're talking about Ketu in Purva Ashadha and Rahu in Punarvasu. So for Punarvasu, we find that there's a welcomeness where fresh enthusiasm for new ideas is welcome. But long-term commitment and patience is something that's tougher for Punarvasu. It can get stuck in a repeating pattern of behavior. So Rahu in Punarvasu is probably looking to always make things fresh, as we've read about it. It takes what's dried out and stale and brings ardram, it brings freshness and moisture to it. So the nodes falling into Punarvasu don't have any specific resonance. But we do read that the fixed, tougher planets can be inflexible and have excessive need for newness. So Rahu and Punarvasu can get bored and distracted and stuck in its old patterns. And it actually wants to get away from the pattern. Rahu and Punarvasu is always trying to make things new and fresh. But what Rahu and Punarvasu needs to realize eventually, it will when a person turns 36 or gets to be 43 years old when Rahu matures, that keeping something fresh and new sometimes involves having a consistent, a formula for keeping things fresh and new. Because if you're always just going from one thing to another thing to another thing, it's like the water is getting scattered. You need to set yourself on one dedicated skill, one dedicated field, and it's in that field that you can let the water flow through. It's interesting that Punarvasu produces ardram. It produces wetness. And having Purva Ashadha, Ketu, is going to be a part of this wetness, a part of the apam, a part of the moisturizing effect that Punarvasu seeks to have to make things fresh and new. So with Rahu and Punarvasu, there needs to be a consciousness of trends, of what is the next hot thing, or what is internally, as the world changes, what are people suffering through? What is the suffering that's happening right now? And everything that happens that's a new suffering comes from the ancient way that humanity has always been. CMO. There's nothing new under the sun when it comes to the human nervous system. The human nervous system operates the same way. But let's say, for example, phones come along and all us monkeys in meat suits are looking at our screens all day. That is something new that Punarvasu needs to see happening and make it fresh, make it allow things to have this newness, but don't let that get dry. Don't let that get stale. How do we use these phones to the proper purpose? So Punarvasu is taking the new things like a phone, which humans have never been used to. It's like, oh, this is the new fresh thing. How do we keep it fresh? How do we keep it from getting stale? Rahu and Punarvasu is just going to stick to one endeavor, one way of understanding the problems in the world. It's going to get stuck on patterns, and it might not be able to remain fresh. And so Ketu and Punarvasu, Ketu and Purva Ashadha wants to bring everybody together, rally everybody together with enthusiasm, varchas, for some kind of assembly, some kind of cohesive reason, semitir. The Rahu and Punarvasu needs the enthusiasm that Purva Ashadha wants to express. It needs to learn to make it present and functional in the immediate contemporary time, the immediate contemporary world. And it needs to be for the return of eternal principles of goodness that also aligns with today's time. Again, the human nervous system has eternal ways of operating at its best, but it needs to do so in a contemporary way. This is what Punarvasu needs to get in tune with, so that Punarvasu Rahu doesn't end up just being, like a Christian zealot who says, all that needs to happen is that people need to love Jesus more. It's so obvious to me. Now I'm going to rally everybody together with my Purva Ashadha Ketu and rally everybody together for the same purpose, which is to just love Jesus more. Which there's some goodness in that. But if the person's early in their Rahu, they're before 36, they're going to find they rally people together and they don't even believe in in how true, or they're not open-hearted about the purposes that they're gathering people for. And people smell it, and that's why the Ketu is constantly trying to bring people together for a purpose that is not fresh, that's stale. That's early Rahu in Punarvasu. Eventually, Rahu in Punarvasu learns how to keep themselves fresh, how to look into their own psyche and see why they're taking it so personally that the world is not considering this thing, that the world is not thinking about Jesus more, that the world's not thinking about yoga more, So the Rahu in Punarvasu needs to find the freshness in themselves. Find what actually works for them. That's not just some social thing that they eyeball and say, oh yeah, that's something that my Ketu could expand on. Not just latching onto the Me Too movement and saying, oh, everybody should do this because I feel empathic and it's going to make me look good if I jump on the bandwagon that everybody else does. You need to find something that actually refreshes yourself and your soul with Rahu and Punarvasu and make it work in your experience. So for sure, and you got to dedicate to it. So you'll dedicate yourself. I'm a bit like this because this is where I think my nodes are flipped. Rahu and Punarvasu needs to find something that works for them, that they even can expand through. It's like you get into yoga and you find the depths of Patanjali and you get into Kriya Yoga, and that's like this ancient thing, but you can make it fresh by adding your experience to it. And you can even rally people with Ketu and Purva Ashadha towards that end, teaching classes on how to make this same old dry thing fresh and new at a large scale to change society with it. That's the Purva Ashadha Ketu. Mike Bailey wonders if there's a cult leader-esque energy to Purva Ashadha. I would say there could be. Depends on the planet falling in there. The nodes could have that energy. I can have that energy with my Rahu and Purva Ashadha and Uranus and Neptune there. It's the desire to lead people and to gather an assembly of people to do something constructive. And when that is your desired energy, at first especially, it's not as important for the immature Purva Ashadha person, wherever the nodes or planets are in there. The immature Purva Ashadha person wants to bring people together because that's an energy that I know I can do. I love guiding large groups of people towards some end that feels to me to be constructive. And if they tell me that I led them towards some constructive new social change, that's good for my ego. So now I want more. I want how do I influence lots of people? That's what Purva Ashadha wants. It's as Purva Ashadha matures that they find out that it's not about leading the people for the sake of leading the people. It's about using the power that you have as a Purva Ashadha person to make positive changes. And it's the change, it's the root, it's the thing itself, it's the water itself that you focus on. You become a channel for the power. And the power is not a channel for you. You are a channel for the power. That's a good question, Mike, and I hope that that's useful. So I like how I just conveyed that. Now let's switch it. Let's have a conversation about when you have, like I do, when you have Rahu in the sign of Purva Ashadha. Now, we just mentioned just a moment ago, it's useful to consider the idea that Purva Ashadha can have a sort of like cult leader-esque mentality if it gets out of hand. And why that happens is when especially with the person with the nodes in with the nodes in Purva Ashadha, just like the Rahu in Purva Ashadha, the person wants to bring people together. That's the Varchaha, it's the enthusiasm and passion to bring lots of people together. Once that water is flowing, the Purva Ashadha person feels very confident. This is my energy. I'm good at gathering, holding all these people together towards one consolidated purpose. And everybody remembers that this was my doing, my group, my enterprise, my unconquerable decision to bring these people together. And the problem with Purva Ashadha when it's immature is that these people know they want that energy. They want to wield that large influence. So if they get attached to wielding influence for the influence's sake, if they get attached to the idea of being a power, of channeling power for power's sake, they will be more invested in the flowing of energy in an egoic way than what the energy is for. They have to let go of their taking it personally that they channeled all this power and focus more on developing an understanding of how this objective, how this social change, how the thing I'm influencing in the world relates personally to me, to my soul. I've experienced it as being good, and I want to use my influence to garner people to go further with this action, this movement that I've experienced for myself, a deep philosophical, spiritual, nurturing connection towards. It's helped me evolve, and I want to help others evolve through it. And it doesn't need to be the whole world. It's not about getting famous and having everyone in the world see how good I am. I'm such a good boy. It's about me sharing the evolution that I've experienced by looking within myself to find whatever it is that the Purva Ashadha wants to address, especially through in this position, you're going to have Ketu either in Ardra or in Punarvasu. So one of those two is going to develop some kind of self-realization that you now want to express to others. And your influence as a Purva Ashadha, Rahu Purva Ashadha, will allow you to spread positive vibrations and knowledge about this evolutionary thing that you've discovered for yourself and loved for yourself. But until that point, the immature Rahu is probably just wants to grab people, bring them together, and say, hey, everybody, I'm this important person. I'm this important wielder of social influence. And again, as we've read in general with the nodes in Purva Ashadha, we read that the nakshatra Purva Ashadha, having the nodes there, the nodes are powerful, which suits this nakshatra well. But they are also, the nodes are individualistic and non-cooperative. And this can clash with this nakshatra's, Purva Ashadha's nature. So when Purva Ashadha malfunctions with Rahu there, it can bring out this sort of feeling of foolhardiness. They're hasty, they're ill-prepared, and they do these over-ambitious enterprises. They attack opponents they're incapable of defeating, and they embark on journeys they lack the fuel to complete. There's this desire to just get something going, to bring everybody together. So two things will happen. Number one is they'll be super enthusiastic about this special thing, everybody. Come together. Come see the special thing that I'm doing. It's so important. You're missing out if you're not doing this thing. And they know the enthusiasm, the varchaha, that to get people excited. But then people come to see this thing and they realize this thing actually isn't as exciting as this person was trying to make it out to be. This person just wanted to be patted on the back and congratulated for being the person who got excited about something. But the thing itself was nothing special. So he's crying wolf. It's like opposite of crying wolf. He's crying that gold is over in them hills. He's crying gold rush, and everybody goes to rush over, and there's no gold. There's only a tiny little speck of gold. It's like, why'd you get so excited about it? Well, I wanted everybody to know that I'm this person who's special and who can call everybody to be excited about something. And they're like, blah. So now the Rahu and Purva Ashadha person feels soiled in this very important dimension of who they are. You know, they've tried to wrangle people together for this positive thing. Now no one believes that they, you know, that they can actually reel in something special. So it's either they wrangle together for the wrong reasons, or they bring a bunch of people together. They have the Rahu desire to bring everybody together for some kind of purpose. But once all the people are gathered together, they have no control over them. They can't wrangle them to do any kind of constructive thing with the people. They're like a dog chasing a car. Well, they don't know what to do once they get the car. And so the Rahu, immature Rahu in Purva Ashadha wrangles together people, has this influence, but then doesn't really know what to do with them once they have them, and can often be spilly and messy with how they organize people to do these things. And everyone's like, you know, who is running this show? And somewhere along, it's a immature Purva Ashadha who just wanted to gain the power, but is letting the power be an expression of them, rather than them serving what the power is intended for, which is the movement itself, which is this positive foundational social change that they've experienced the goodness of in their own personal way. That's a mature Rahu. That's a Rahu that has kind of let go of the excitement of the power, and now almost just has to do it because it's an obligation, because of some important thing that they've experienced. So what that important thing is probably going to be based on where their Ketu is. Ketu in Ardra has probably experienced some kind of bad thing, some kind of conspiracy, some kind of, you know, something has happened to the Ardra person where they are constantly on the lookout for evil, for bad people. And a lot of the times with Ketu and Ardra, you'll realize that with Ketu anywhere, you're taking something too personally. You're too close to it. You have a responsibility as someone with any planet in Ardra to be Shiva, to be Rudra, to destroy the things that are bad in order that the good things can come, particularly with Purva Ashadha. So Ketu with Ardra, the purpose that the goodness that the Rahu in Purva Ashadha is trying to bring is partly based on an evil that the Ketu and Ardra has seen. It's this evil that's stopping us from bringing the water. And so we need to get excitement and enthusiasm to stop that evil from happening. Or that the goodness of Purva Ashadha is going to help to mitigate an evil. So Ketu and Ardra, what they have to, at first, they're going to be trying to bring people together for personal reasons. Like, you know, again, with Ketu and Ardra, it's like early in their life, they got bullied by this guy named Steve. And so now, before they're 36 and 43, you know, Steve comes up as this political person, and the Ketu and Ardra person wants to rally everybody together in order to take down Steve and his terrible political policies. Not because of Steve's political policies, but because there's a personal attack, some personal energy that the Ketu and Ardra has to get out. It's hatred, but what happens with Ketu and Ardra is that as they try to rally people together to destroy something, people begin to smell it's not the objective that the Ketu Ardra person is interested in. It's like hatred for his own father, or hatred for her own mother, or qualities in her mother that she hasn't yet integrated, or qualities in his father or his mother, or something that happened to him, an uncle that molested him or her. You know, something happened to them where they need to channel their personal angst to destroy the bad thing. So what they need to do is with Ketu and Ardra, you need to do some deep self-healing therapy, psychological counseling, and looking within yourself to find out the personal dimension of your anger so that you can cleave yourself from that and use your anger constructively. That's nodes in Ardra. Then once the Ketu and Ardra person, after about 36, 43, what's going to happen with them is that the Rahu in Purva Ashadha is going to pull you into dealing with people and force you to reckon with how personal you've taken things with Ketu and Ardra. And then Ketu is going to eventually mature, and you'll realize how much of your anger was not being used constructively or in the right way. People with Ketu and Ardra also ignore their anger. And then they do this Purva Ashadha thing, and they've got secret anger, and everybody smells it. And you'll be pushed around. It's Rahu and Purva Ashadha learning to be about the objective and not taking things personally. That's going to force you to out what you've neglected with Ketu and Ardra. The anger you've neglected, or the lack of anger, etc. The integration of anger is an important thing for all of us, but especially anyone with anything in Ardra. Now, with the nodes in Punarvasu, here now we have Ketu in Punarvasu and Rahu in Purva Ashadha. And I believe that this is my personal signature. What we have is that the Ketu person is, with any planets in Punarvasu, you need to make the old and dry fresh and new. So Punarvasu, Ketu and Punarvasu, early on in their lives, they're going to try to, again, wrangle people through the Rahu energy of Purva Ashadha. They're going to try to wrangle people together for the purpose of some important thing that Punarvasu has discovered. It's yoga. Sometimes it's zealous religiousness. It wants to be basically regarded as someone who has caught onto an important, perennial, eternal dimension of the human nervous system, or human philosophy, or political philosophy. They're going to find some old way of doing things, and they're going to want to take it from an ancient understanding and make it new. That could be, people with Ketu and Punarvasu are often finding new things that are their new philosophy. For my sake, or for the sake of anyone with this, you get into Taoism. It's all about water and being peaceful. And then after a while, you can go into something like Marcus Aurelius. It's like, this water has been too feminizing for me in my experience. And now Marcus Aurelius is this hard guy who's got these hard ideas about determined, distinct political philosophy, about practical material reality, about economy. You can get into Sun Tzu. It's the art of war, and understanding how to apply the art of war to your own psyche and to the psyche of conquering things. But then you get in, I went through a lot of these different philosophies, and for a while, in each phase, I was like, this is it, everybody. This is the thing. Like, you're all missing out by not doing this thing. Eventually, the Ketu and Punarvasu person can consolidate a lot of these different things and land finally on some philosophy, some technique, some principle of science, some ecological or economical principle. They'll solidify their experience in the field of one of these things. And then they will be an authority on it. And then they will be able to use their Rahu in Purva Ashadha. It's the Rahu in Purva Ashadha is going to be the reason why the Punarvasu person consolidates all of their interests into one solid thing. And the Rahu in Purva Ashadha is going to need to rally people together for a specific thing. Punarvasu is going to have everybody rallied up. They're going to be probably a social influencer, rallies everybody together to express some kind of succinct purpose. And people look to the person and they say, so what is this purpose that we're into? And with Ketu and Punarvasu, it's going to change from day to day, from year to year, right? Oh, well, we're into this, everybody. And everyone's like, okay, let's try to build, we're into Buddhism. Okay, well, let's try to build a Buddhist temple. And then they get into the Buddhist temple. They've gathered everybody together for it, but they don't have longevity, because that's how Ketu and Punarvasu is looking to make things fresh. By doing so, an immature Ketu Punarvasu person has no longevity. They don't know how to stick to one thing. So they'll rally everybody up to make a Buddhist temple for a year or two, but it takes, like, say, 5 years. And then into those 2 years, the person says, you know what? I just realized I'm not actually into Buddhism. I'm going to just completely left turn this and go completely into Christianity, because that's what my heart feels. And then so they start to get into Christianity. They build a great, let's spend the next 2 years trying to rally everybody together to make a Christian temple. So the Buddhist temple falls away because now there's no leadership there, unless hopefully, if the person's got good things happening with their Ketu Lord, they can let that thing not be a waste, hang on to it long enough so that people can manifest it and nurture it, and another leader can be put in its place. Good, glad to help. Now I'm going to the Christian thing. Get deeply into that, gather people up to try and make people love Jesus more, and then eventually the Punarvasu person says, again, I got to change. This isn't really me. Eventually, once Rahu begins to mature, the person's going to find that they're not advancing in life by just doing all these little things that don't add up to anything meaningful. So that's why when the Rahu matures, the person realizes that I need to stick to something. What's the most meaningful way that I can commit myself to bringing people together for something that is eternal to me? It's something in myself that I know that I've experienced for years, as always I end up landing on the same thing. For me so far, this seems to be astrology, Kriya yoga, yoga in general. Of all the things I've gotten interested in, I'm falling into the specific things that work specifically for me. So you're not going to see me talking about the Me Too movement because everyone is talking about this big Me Too movement, or just as an example, I'm not against it. I'm just saying any movement that comes along that's a fad or didn't come from my experience, I'm not as interested in it as much, right? I want it to fit and be centered and relate to me, to my life experience. That's when the Punarvasu begins to mature through the Rahu and Purva Ashadha. So yeah, I could go on forever about these, but I love talking about the nodes in the nakshatras, so I'm glad I got to speak to that. Now we have one question here. Hello, Amo Ghoul. Yes, I am back in my bedroom. Now, Amo Ghoul, you've asked about the graha maturation. I've actually my dog is barking. It's going to be bugging me. I've actually just recently made a video discussing the evolutionary script, which includes in it the maturation of the grahas. So check out my video on that. But essentially, the grahas all mature at certain scripted ages. Saturn matures at 36, Rahu matures at 43, Ketu matures at 48. And there's usually a shakeup that happens at those ages that forces you to mature in the node. So Rahu begins to awaken at 36, it matures at 43, and that's a midlife crisis shakeup that forces you to stop screwing around with what you're doing with Rahu. It's at that time that the Purva Ashadha Rahu person is going to use their social influence to come together on something that's meaningful to them that they have to commit to. And that objectivity, that doing it for the thing itself, not for me, but for this movement that's bigger than me, so that I'm a channel for something bigger. It's that the Rahu person is going to experience and enjoy being a part of, and that's going to make them question the problems, the gunk associated with Ketu and Ardra or Ketu and Punarvasu. The things that you're taking personally and not allowing yourself to be a channel, an objective channel for goodness. Okay. Good. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this. So that was our discussion about the nodes, the maturations. Like I said, check out my video on Graha or planetary maturation ages for more about the maturations. Ultimately, Purva Ashadha is an important nakshatra for this consolidation of people to a powerful movement. And I'm glad that I got to describe this through the nodes. So thank you very much for watching that. Now let's continue on. We're now going to be describing our life lessons to be understood from this nakshatra. And as well, we're going to get into, at the end of things, a description of the native. Somebody, no problem, Amogul. At the very end, we're going to get into the nature of the Purva Ashadha native. Now, I don't know what my dog's barking at. My dad's probably talking to a neighbor. Nah, I've got to go let her out. So I'm going to let the dog out, and then I'm going to be right back. Alanis. Come on, puppy. Come. Come outside. Come on. Look here. No, no. Oh, I'm going to have to let her in eventually. Okay. Wonderful, folks. Let me just close this. So next, we're going to read a little bit of the life lessons that we can learn as a totality from Purva Ashadha. So what we read from Vic is that the concept that water, apas, is powerful, Ashadha. This is a significant revelation to Vic because water is soft and nourishing, which Vic did not conceive of as powerful at first. The divinity named Apas is a goddess, not a god. Again, not what one would typically expect for the unconquerable nakshatra. At least not at first, again, but the nakshatra has kind of taught Vic this point. This sutra showed me, and this is Vic talking, this sutra showed me that water and femininity has great power when it comes together and flows. Softness, care, consideration, nourishment, and togetherness. These are classically feminine traits associated with water. These contain indomitable power because they allow teams to be formed, and when teams pool their resources, any hurdle can be overcome. This confirms that feminine strength thrives by togetherness and mutual prosperity. Now, a second lesson that Vic mentions that he learned is that success requires focus, but focus is not the same as uniformity. By using the word samiti, the sutra teaches us that this focus does not eliminate diversity. It concentrates diverse talents and resources into a single goal. It's a very wonderful point. That's a very important one for this whole nakshatra, especially the nodes. I'm burning these in my brain as I speak. The third lesson that, again, this is Vic speaking, the third lesson I learned is how to start a project with the greatest chances for success. The key is that our enthusiasm should be directed to foreseeing and gathering all the resources and talents that one will need to overcome the initial obstacles one will face. Once we have this preparation done, we can set out from the starting line like a powerful and confident elephant. And that is what makes this nakshatra unconquerable, is learning everything that you need to scramble together and wrangle up in order to create these great unconquerable cohesive actions with diverse talents and groups and teams. You put it with great initiatory intention, bringing all the things that you know you're going to need eventually together at one time in order to move forward with it. So now we have the supplication, and this is a little prayer that Vic Dicara has culled from the other parts of the Taittiriya Brahmana. The Taittiriya Brahmana contains commentaries and extra information about each of the nakshatras. And so this little bit relates with Purva Ashadha. What we read is, may waters, appa, flow from the sky to the earth, be drunk and pervade our inner being. May these waters from Ashadha lead to the fulfillment of our desires. May these waters calm and delight us. Let the waters collect in wells, rivers, and seas. Let them be stored in glaciers and in reservoirs. In this nakshatra, let us drink their sweetness. May these waters calm and delight us. Wonderful. That comes from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, by our boy, Vic Dicara. Very happy to have been able to share that with everybody. So Amogul, you asked if I've looked into astrocartography or locational astrology relating to Vedic and sidereal. I know those things exist. I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer, so for me the sidereal nakshatras are a thing, but I would overlay them over tropical coordinates, zodiac coordinates. I'm sure that there are tropical Vedic astrologers as well as just Vedic astrologers out there who do astrocartography and locational astrology. I think Ernst is into it. He's into that real predictive, down to the details kind of stuff. But I myself am not too much into stuff like that. I'm more of a psychologist. I'm into the natal chart and the horoscope, defining it, using it for counseling and therapy. Again, so is Ernst. Ernst is just into everything. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I have a video at the top of my channel where I showed several tropical Vedic astrologers from various parts of the world. You could dig in there, check out their emails, and ask any of them if they're doing that service. But I haven't gotten into it myself. Amogul. Always, thanks for the questions. So we've just read from Vic. Let's do one more reading here today. And this following reading is going to come from another author named Radhe. She is this wonderful author who has brought together the portrayal of the divine forces of the deity in the classical Vedas as it is portrayed throughout the Vedas. In this case, of course, we're talking about Purva Ashadha and its deity Appam, the water goddess. So in this book, if you watch to the end of this video, there's going to be a little extra, and there's an extra video that I have discussing Appam in the classical Vedas. But in this moment, our main focus is to look at how Radha, the author, describes the native of Purva Ashadha. It's 275. So that is our main thing here, is that we're looking at the native who has significant placements in Purva Ashadha, particularly the rising sign, the moon, or any large stellium of planets there, any large important planetary placement, the Atmakarika, what have you. And this comes from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas. Now keep in mind that the writer of this book happens to be a sidereal practitioner. So they do consider that the zodiac is married to the stars. There's still great work in here that conveys the nature of a pum. So we have to take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes I'm usually good at catching it and thinking, oh, it's, oh, I can see that that's a sidereal perspective, and I'll try to take it out as I read it, kind of thing. But it's just good for us to keep this in mind. In today's time, we want to read about what ancient tradition has said about the nature of a native who is in these nakshatra qualities. And that's what we're doing here. We just have to be diligent in keeping in mind of the bias of an author like this and the reading that we're getting from. Ultimately, she's usually still on point, and it's usually still a very interesting read. So again, this is the nature of the native with any planets in Purva Ashadha, particularly the moon or the rising sign. So here's what we read. In keeping with the name of this nakshatra, which is Ashadha, meaning invincible or victory, Jyotisha Shastra classifies Purva Ashadha as an ugra or fierce nakshatra. It is said to be ideal for success in ruining enemies, destruction, deceit, imprisoning, poison, arson, striking with weapons, and murderers and the like. That comes from Brihat Samhita, Part 2. Very interesting. And that's the Ugra Nakshatras. So here, the Appas goddesses are seen as the daunting force of a powerful river rushing towards the ocean. Success under Purva Ashadha requires similar determination and momentum, varchas, as we know. The native follows their goals as relentlessly as the river flows towards the sea, achieving success as surely as the rivers reunite with the vast ocean. So the yearning of the Appas, the goddesses, the water, to merge with something larger and more powerful than themselves is also bestowed upon the Purva Ashadha native. The individual drops of a river become exponentially more formidable when merging with the countless others to form the mighty ocean. For this native, too, great achievements come from synergistic alignment with others. Occupying the center of the Sagittarius constellation. Okay, yeah, I should have known that that would be... Okay, right, so this whole thing is saying that there's a connection to Sagittarius and Purva Ashadha. Let's skip that and move on to the next thing. Now we read that there is a strength of strategy. So as a master of strategist, the Purva Ashadha native may elect the profession of strategy consulting, be it for Fortune 500 companies, the government, or military. So recall that victory is schemed under Purva Ashadha, but accomplished in full under Uttara Ashadha. So the native may be better at strategizing than execution, with an emphasis of this nakshatra. It's thinking about all the plans that need to go in before a movement unfolds that becomes bigger than themselves, right? Figuring out all the pieces of the chess game that are going to be needed when we get out there. So, as with the Uttara Ashadha native, there's an invincible side to the Purva Ashadha person. Cunningly planning each artful victory, this person enters into battles with great confidence. So we read that Adolf Hitler had his moon and Jupiter, as well as Ketu, occupying Purva Ashadha. He displayed many of the coarse elements of Purva Ashadha. He was the mastermind behind the single-party dictatorship of the Third Reich, and implementation of his strategies triggered World War II. With the intent of purifying Germany, Hitler approved the genocide of over 5 million Jews. In such an extreme example of Purva Ashadha's desire for success and relentless purification, other chart factors come into play. And then there's some descriptions given of Hitler's chart, although it's sidereal. But I think this is a great picture of the worst of Purva Ashadha. And it's interesting that the moon and Jupiter and Ketu seem to all occupy Purva Ashadha. So, you can see the gross nature of how that came out there, especially with the moon conjunct Ketu. As well, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that it's probably the case that the Rahu might have been in Ardra for Hitler to have that anger. But I digress. We don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. Now, more typically, the Purva Ashadha native directs his attention to improving and purifying his own life. His desire to separate the wheat from the chaff results in perpetual personal refinement. So much attention is focused on cleansing the mind until, like the Sarasvati River, its channels run clean and pure. With the Appas as its ruling devatas, Purva Ashadha gives an affinity for water. If the fourth bhava pavesha involves Purva Ashadha, the native might live by a lake or near the ocean. So that's if the fourth lord, the bhava pavesha, that's like, if you're a Cancer rising, Libra is the fourth sign in the whole sign house system. So Venus is the fourth bhava pavesha, the fourth lord. So if the fourth lord involves Purva Ashadha, the native might live by a lake or near the ocean. If instead such a planet is the competitive third lord or the sixth lord, then perhaps there's a love for competitive water sports. Expect a profession connected with water if the 10th lord activates Purva Ashadha. For example, the person may be a midwife who assists mothers in water births, or something of the sort. Now, some other possible careers are offered by the Brihat Samhita. This Jyotish Sastra suggests that the potential is there for a profession as a navigator, a fisherman, one who works with aquatic animals, and constructors of bridges. Add to this list an oceanographer, marine biologist, or perhaps an irrigation expert, someone who's dealing with water, irrigation, and agricultural contexts and purposes. I'm very glad to be bringing the consciousness, to be speaking passionately about my passion for consciousness and the nakshatras here. Amul. Thanks for listening and for being a part of it. To you as well, Akwi Anem. And for everybody watching, I hope you guys enjoyed that. My name is Dustin Cormier. This has been our episode today on How to Rock Astrology. We have just gone and discussed all there is to the Nakshatra Sutra description of Purva Ashadha, whose deity is Apaha, water. I owe much to this nakshatra, to Apaha, the goddess, the deity of the feminine. I'm very glad to be doing the work that I am, in fact, to be able to describe the powers and qualities of these nakshatras. There's a lot to learn there, and the more that we talk about it, the more we enjoy discussing and learning about it, the clearer the nature of these nakshatras are going to get for all of us in today's time. So thanks everybody. Thanks Toxica. Thanks to everybody for hanging out and for watching. Keep your eyes peeled. I think next week we're going to do another rising sign. And I'm going to start doing some different sun and moon sign readings, as well as as always, we've got our cold readings to be done on the second Thursday of every month. So I hope you guys enjoy, and until then, take care, stay safe, stay blessed. I'll see you guys